French Revolution. The absolute monarchy in France. The King of France concentrated in his person legislative, executive, and judicial powers. He was the supreme judicial authority. He could condemn men to death without the right of appeal. It was both his duty to punish offenses and stop them from being committed. From his judicial authority followed his power both to make laws and to annul them. One of the most important kings in France was Louis XIV. Louis XIV was born on September 5 of 1638, known as Louis the Great or the Sun King, was a monarch of the House of Bourbon who ruled as King of France from 1643 at the age of 5 until his death in September 1 of 1715. His reign of 72 years and 110 days is the longest of any monarch of a major country in European history. One of his steps in creating an absolute monarchy in France was to build the Palace of Versailles, where he lived with many of his nobles and other important people, in order to control and watch over them. At that time, France seemed to be a strong nation. Then Louis XVI appeared. Louis XVI was born on August 23 in 1754, on May 16, 1770, at the age of 15, Louis Augusta married the 14-year-old Habsburg Archduchess Maria Antonia, better known by the French form of her name, Marie Antoinette. Nevertheless, the royal couple failed to produce any children for several years after their wedding, placing a strain upon their marriage, whilst the situation was worsened by the publication of obscene pamphlets, libels, which mocked the infertility of the pair. The reasons behind the couple's initial failure to have children were debated at that time, and they have continued to be so since. One suggestion is that Louis Augusta suffered from a physiological dysfunction. In spite of all their earlier difficulty, the royal couple became the parents of 4 children. When Louis XVI succeeded to the throne in 1774, he was 19 years old. He had an enormous responsibility, as the government was deeply in debt, and resentment to despotic monarchy was on the rise. Louis also felt woefully unqualified for the job. As king, Louis focused primarily on religious uniformity and foreign policy. While none doubted Louis's intellectual ability to rule France, it was quite clear that, although raised as the Dauphin since 1765, he lacked firmness and decisiveness. His desire to be loved by his people is evident in the prefaces of many of his edicts that would often explain the nature and good intention of his actions as benefiting the people. The causes of the French Revolution can be attributed to several intertwining ways. Social causes: the emergence of an influential bourgeoisie which was formerly part of the Third Estate, commoners, but had evolved into a caste with its own agenda and aspired to political equality with aristocracy. Financial causes: France's debt, aggravated by French involvement in the American Independence War, led Louis XVI to implement new taxations and to reduce privileges. Political causes: Louis XVI faced virulent opposition from provincial parliaments which were the spearheads of the privileged class's resistance to royal reforms. Economical causes: the deregulation of the grain market, advocated by physiocrats, resulted in an increase in bread prices. In period of bad harvests, it would lead to famines which would prompt the masses to revolt. Finally, one of the major causes was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a philosophy desacralized the authority of the king and the church, and promoted a new society based on reason instead of traditions. A growing number of the French citizenry had absorbed the ideas of equality and freedom of the individual as presented by Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Denis Diderot, and other philosophers and social theorists of the Enlightenment. All these factors created a revolutionary atmosphere and a tricky situation for Louis XVI. In order to resolve the crisis, the king summoned the Estates General in May 1789 and, as it came to an impasse, the representatives of the Third Estates formed into a National Assembly, against the wishes of the king, signaling the outbreak of the French Revolution. During the French Revolution, the National Assembly was a revolutionary assembly formed by the representatives of the Third Estate of the Estates General. Thereafter, until replaced by the Legislative Assembly on September 30, 1791, it was known as the National Constituent Assembly, though popularly the shorter form persisted. In an attempt to keep control of the process and prevent the Assembly from convening, Louis XVI ordered the closure of the Salle des Etats where the Assembly met, making an excuse that the carpenters needed to prepare the hall for a royal speech in 2 days. Weather did not allow an outdoor meeting, so the Assembly moved their deliberations to a nearby indoor real tennis court, where they proceeded to swear the tennis court oath, June 20, 1789, under which they agreed not to separate until they had given France a constitution. La Bastille. On July 14, the insurgents set their eyes on the large weapons and ammunition cache inside the Bastille fortress, which was also perceived to be a symbol of royal power. After several hours of combat, the prison fell that afternoon. Despite ordering a ceasefire, which prevented a mutual massacre, Governor Marquis Bernard de Launay was beaten, stabbed, and decapitated. His head was placed on a pike and paraded about the city. Although the fortress had held only 7 prisoners, the Bastille served as a potent symbol of everything hated under the Ancien regime. Returning to the city hall, the mob accused Mayor Jacques de Flesselis of treachery and butchered him. The king, alarmed by the violence, backed down, at least for the time being. The Marquis de Lafayette took up command of the National Guard at Paris. First Republic and the Reign of Terror. The Committee of Public Safety, created in March 1793 by the National Convention and then restructured in July 1793, formed the de facto executive government in France during the Reign of Terror, a stage of the French Revolution. The Committee of Public Safety succeeded the previous Committee of General Defense and assumed its role of protecting the newly established republic against foreign attacks and internal rebellion. In the Brunswick Manifesto, the Imperial and Prussian armies threatened retaliation on the French population if it were to resist their advance or the reinstatement of the monarchy. This, among other things, makes appear to be conspiring with the enemies of France. On January 17, 1793, Louis was condemned to death for conspiracy against the public liberty and the general safety by a close majority in convention. The former Louis XVI was executed by guillotine on January 21, 1793 on the Place de la Révolution. The Committee of Public Safety came under the control of Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer, and the Jacobins unleashed the Reign of Terror, 1793-1794. According to archival records, at least 16,594 people died under the guillotine or otherwise after accusations of counter-revolutionary activities. As many as 40,000 accused prisoners may have been summarily executed without trial or died awaiting trial. In the early morning of October 16, the now widow Capet, Marie Antoinette, after 2 days of proceedings, she was declared guilty of treason. Despite the humiliation, more severe than the manner in which her husband had been put to death, Marie Antoinette, who looked sad and under great pain, was able to some extent to maintain her composure, earning the respect of some of her enemies. Marie Antoinette had sufficient determination to die as a martyred queen. At 12:15 p.m. on October 16, 1793, 2.5 weeks before her 38th birthday, Marie Antoinette was guillotined at the Place de la Révolution. The Reign of Terror ultimately weakened the revolutionary government, while temporarily ending internal opposition. The Republican Army repulsed the Austrians, Prussians, British, and Spanish. On July 27, 1794, the Thermidorian reaction led to the arrest and execution of Robespierre, Louis de Saint-Just, and other leading Jacobins. The new government was predominantly made up of Girondists who had survived the terror, and after taking power, they took revenge as well by persecuting even those Jacobins who had helped to overthrow Robespierre, banning the Jacobin Club, and executing many of its former members in what was known as the White Terror. In the wake of excesses of the terror, the convention approved the new Constitution of the Year 3 on August 22, 1795. The results of the voting were announced on September 23, 1795, and the new constitution took effect on September 27, 1795. The new regime was called the Directory. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte staged the coup of 18 Brumaire, which installed the Consulate. This effectively led to Bonaparte's dictatorship and eventually, in 1804, to his proclamation as Emperor, which brought to a close the specifically republican phase of the French Revolution. Consequences and legacies. The revolution unified France and enhanced the power of the national state. The Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars tore down the ancient structure of Europe, hastened the advent of nationalism, and inaugurated the era of modern, total warfare. Some of the legacies of the French Revolution is a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which became part of French law on August 16, 1789, as well as inspiring other political revolutions in Europe, paving the way to democracy and also the French flag. Abolition of the French monarchy, establishment of a secular and democratic republic that became increasingly authoritarian and militaristic, radical social change based on liberalism and other Enlightenment principles, rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, armed conflicts with other European countries, were also some of the outcomes of the French Revolution.